Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone who made it today to this talk, despite the very hectic and turbulent day. I see a lot of students, I see a lot of staff from University of Amsterdam. Thank you so much for making it. And today we have a really great pleasure to welcome Olivier Roy, who is visiting Amsterdam and will be presenting about his latest book. I will just give a brief introduction of our esteemed speaker and of the discussant before giving the floor to Olivier. Olivier Roy, for those who may not know him, is presently professor at the European University Institutes in Florence. He has been a senior researcher at the French National Center for Scientific Research and a visiting professor at Berkeley University. He also headed the OSCE mission for Tajikistan and was a consultant for the United Nations Office of Coordination for Afghanistan. He also worked as a part-time consultant for the policy planning staff of the French Minister of Foreign Affairs. Besides his academic work, many of you may know him for the text and a lot of interesting ideas that he shared about Afghanistan, political Islam, Middle East, Islam in the West, and comparative religions. Among his most known books are The Failure of Political Islam, published in 1994, Globalized Islam, 2004, Holy Ignorance, published with Oxford in 2010, and Is Europe Christian, published also with Oxford University Press in 2019. And some of the ideas that will be shared today come from his latest book called The Crisis of Culture, Identity Politics and the Empire of Norms from 2024. We also have a pleasure to have with us Gerard Wiegers, who will be a discussant to Olivier Roy's talk. Gerard Wiegers is full professor of history and comparative studies of religion at the University of Amsterdam. Previously, he was a full professor of religious studies, in particular Islam, at the Radboud University Nijmegen, and associate professor and research fellow at the Royal Dutch Academy of Sciences and Arts at Leiden University. His research concentrates on the relations between Islam and other religions when looking in Europe and the Muslim West, as well as at the history of Islamic and Jewish minorities in Europe and the Middle East. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Olivier Roy.
Thank you very much. So I will try to summarize all what I did, what I thought, during the last 45 years, in 30 minutes, which shows that we are overpaid, in our academic job. I have always been working on religions in general. My master was on Leibniz and China, especially, the relationship between the philosopher Leibniz and the Jesuit missionaries who were in China at the time trying to convert the Chinese, but mainly the emperor of China, it was easier, and had to deal with the issue how to combine, should we adapt Catholicism to the Chinese culture? Should we ignore the Chinese culture? Or should we find in the Chinese culture something which is, in a sense, superior to any kind of religion? So the debate on religion and culture, let's say, started from this time, but it was one of the turning points of the issue of what are the relationship between religion and culture. Then, for different reasons, I worked on Muslim countries, Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, and then Central Asia. But in the same time, I started my career as a philosophy teacher in secondary school in the town of Dreux in France. And it's a very interesting town because now it's a town with almost a majority of people with an migrant background. I am not saying with migrants, but people with a migrant backgrounds. When I started there in 1974, 50 years ago, I had the first, second generation Muslim students, the first children of the first wave of the labor migrants in France. And now these guys are almost my age, you know, they are 70 years old. No? They are grandfathers, they have children, great children, etc. So I've been able to study very empirically, you know, I didn't make any academic research, but the trajectories of migrants in France for 3 generations. And it's would say fantastic field work. So on one hand, I am still living, when I am in France, I'm still living in this town. So I am living in a suburban town in France, middle town, 30,000 inhabitants, looking at what has happened during 50 years. And I went to Afghanistan when I met the first jihadists, the Arab volunteers, who were 18 years old at that time, were coming from Algeria, from Libya, from northern Iraq, from Morocco, but mainly from Algeria, to fight against the communist regime and the Soviet invaders of Afghanistan. And for 8 years, I went for 8 years. I went regularly in Afghanistan, spent a lot of time inside Afghanistan. And so I was able to see the birth of the Jihadi movement, because, as everybody knows, the international Jihadi movement started to be, or more exactly, has its roots in the Afghan jihad against the Soviet. So I had the two, I was working on the two sides, of the spectrum. The second generation Muslims in France, the jihadi volunteers in Afghanistan. Same age, in a way I would say same generation. And I used to go so a lot of in Iran. My working language in Middle East is Persian. I have a diploma in Persian. I'm not very good, but okay, I have the diploma, so I can say I speak. And I used to speak, by the way. And then the Soviet Union crashed, I went to Tajikistan because of the language. It's a very close language with Afghanistan, and I spent a lot of time in Central Asia during the 90s. And after 9/11, of course, I was supposed to become an expert of terrorism because of my working background. And by the way, on the 9/11, I was in Dushanbe in Tajikistan, expecting to go to Afghanistan to meet Commander Massoud, and he was killed by Al-Qaeda 2 days before we were supposed to meet. So once again, the different sides of the spectrum joined together. New York 9/11, Dushanbe, Kabul, Al-Qaeda, who started, in fact, to build its international networks in Afghanistan. I wrote in 91 in French, and it was published in 93 in English, the book The Failure of Political Islam, which means, in fact, very precisely, the failure of the Muslim Brothers, or the equivalent of the Muslim Brothers, Maududi in Pakistan, Khomeini in Iran, to establish a true Islamic state in a true Islamic society. It doesn't work. Many people told me, and still I'm telling me that I was wrong from the beginning, that the Islamism is working very well, etc. Well, in Iran, for instance, you have an Islamic state, you have had an Islamic state for now 40 years, and the result is the most secular society in the Middle East. Now, the most secular society. People don't go to the mosques. So it's what I call the failure of political Islam. It doesn't mean that the guys are unable to take the power. You can have autocratic powers everywhere. It means that from this power, the state power, they have been totally unable to create a true Islamic society. On the contrary. And we'll discuss later on that. In Europe, we had not a similar case. I don't want to make well, a comparison which are too excessive, but in Poland, we had a Catholic party claiming to establish, to set up a true Catholic state and nation in Poland, the peace. They had the power for 8 years. Fortunately enough, it's a democratic country, so they lost the elections. And if we look at the statistics on the religious practices, we see that during the 8 years of Catholic Conservative Party, the mass attendance in Poland fall from 60% of the polls to 30%. And the percentage of mass attendance is smaller with people under 25. So what we see in Poland is a de-Christianization, and I would say on the model of Ireland. Ireland is a typical model of example of a Catholic country which stopped to be Catholic in 10 years. We have the same story with Quebec. Quebec is also in 10 years well, a great wave of de-Christianization. So my not concern, I wouldn't say that, but my focus was what does it mean now? What did happen? And my conclusion is that what did happen is a disconnect between religion and culture. Instead of a return to religion, people used to speak about the return to religion in the 90s. We do not have a return to religion. What we have is a greater visibility of religion. And why it's a greater visibility? Because it's suddenly religious signs starting to seem a bit weird, you know. If you take, when I was a little boy, it was very usual to have priests in cassock, you know, to have nuns, you know, with a big white cap in the streets, working at the hospital. 2 members of a parliament in France in the early 50s were priests, and they used to come with their priest attire, you know, with the black cassock, the French flag, the Légion d'honneur, etc. And there was no problem, no problem. Now it would be totally impossible. If suppose that a priest would be elected, which is totally out of the, well, okay, but it's another story, he would not be allowed to come into the parliament with his traditional cassock. And the law didn't change. That's not the law which changed. It's the vision of the place, the room, and the vision about Christianism. No. So my theory is that what we call religious fundamentalism is not a return to a conservative kind of religion. It's, on the contrary, a consequence of the deculturation of religion, of the disconnect between the dominant culture and religion. Of course, it can take very different forms. So my first study was about Salafism, especially among migrants, because a good case of deculturation is migration. When you migrate, you are suddenly confronted with a different culture, and many people think, okay, so it's a clash of cultures, you have 2 cultures. So, but no, it's not 2 cultures, you know, it's 1 culture. And people who have a problem to assess what is their culture. Because the pristine culture, the culture of origin, simply is not translatable. You cannot bring it like that. You know. You may look as if you were bringing your traditional culture into a foreign country, but in fact it's not the traditional culture. And the first generation, in Dreux we have mainly Moroccans and Turks, the first generation people were believers. They consider themselves as good Muslims. But for the Moroccans, for the Turks, it's different. For the Moroccans, they had a problem to transmit. And the problem is first a language. The children were educated in French. Most of the children don't understand the language of their grandfather or grandmother. Not just because they have been educated in French, but because you have three-level problems of language. The grandfathers and the grandparents don't speak Arabic. They speak either dialect, Moroccan. Of course, if I say Moroccan dialect, many people say, no, it's not a dialect, it's a Moroccan language, and especially in Algeria. But an Arabic which is not understandable by somebody from Saudi Arabia or Syria. So in fact, it's a different language. But many of them are Kabyles or Berbers, and they have another language. So you have the problem of the language of transmission. And it's very difficult to transmit a culture if you change the language. Secondly, the religion of the grandparents, well, didn't mean anything in a new environment, in an urban environment. And the parents were unable to transmit. When I was a teacher, I used to have contacts with the parents, and the fathers, let's say. They came and they say, I don't know what to say to my daughter, especially the daughter, of course. She's laughing when I speak about religion. She doesn't wear a veil, etc., etc. But after, let's say, 20 years, so mainly in France, it was at the end of the 80s, suddenly the second generation, not all, but some of the second generation came and say, oh, I am a Muslim. I want to wear the veil. I want to do as a good Muslim. But they had no model of how to be a Muslim in the Western context. So they invented a system, a way. And everybody invented his or her own way of being a Muslim. It was quite open. Except that some school of thoughts were more adapted to this deculturation and globalization, especially Salafism. Why? Because Salafism is mainly a normative Islam. So when your faith is embedded in a culture, you have no problem. You don't ask yourself, what is my faith? It's embedded in a culture. But when you have this disembedding from culture, you have to ask yourself, what should I do? What should I do? Is cheese halal? Is this halal? Etc. Etc. So deculturation entails normativity. When things stop to be obvious, to be evident, to be part of something which has been transmitted, you have to reinvent your religion, and the way is to reinvent it as a normative system. So we have that with Islam, and you have that also with Christianity. The evangelical, why is it that in the 70s, at the end of the 70s, abortion became the motto of conservative Christians? It was not the case before. I'm not saying that abortion was allowed, but abortion was something among other things. And now, since the end of the 70s, for conservative Catholics, for evangelical Protestants, the main, the central, issue is abortion. And what is abortion here? It's a normative. It's a norm. You shall not abort. But that's all. So I found that in Christianity we have the same shift from an embedded religion embedded in a culture to a normative system of religion, a normative system, of religion. I will not enter into details. And then my last point was looking at the woke movement. And which is interesting with the woke movement, it's also a normative system, a system of normativity. It's not a system of values. It's mainly a system of normativity, or more exactly, the values are understood as embedded into norms, sexual life, norms and categories, the different LGBT++, the different categories. So you have a system of normativity. So my not the conclusion of my speech, will take some more, but my conclusion at this level was what we have is not a problem of religion. It's a problem of deculturation, a general deculturation. Is that what we lost, for different reasons, is the shared evidence. What we lost is implicit, the implicit. That there are certain things that we have in common, but we don't think about that because it's precisely seen as totally evident. It doesn't mean that there is a consensus. Of course, no, there is no consensus. We are always debating about politics, about religion, so on. But this debate starts from a shared culture. Give you some example. The first shared culture is language. Language. We have our mother tongue. We can perfectly adapt to a different language. We are not determined. We are not defined by our mother tongue. We can learn another language. But when we learn, or we used to learn a language, we used to learn a culture. Latin, for example, was the global language of the Roman Empire. But when you, not you, but people at that time, used to learn Latin, they used to learn the literature. If you look at the Confessions of Augustine, Saint Augustine, he complained how difficult it was for him to learn the grammar, to learn the author, but he was very proud of that. And at the end, he said, yes, he acknowledged the existence of a Latin culture. Same thing for the French in the 18th century. The French was the language of communication in Europe, but the people who were learning French, mainly the elite, of course, used to learn the French culture. They knew about Racine, about Voltaire, etc., etc. It was part of the culture. So you may change your culture. You may shift from a specific culture to a more global culture, but it was always a culture. Now it's finished. The language that we have in common is not English. It's Globish. It's an English that we learn without any reference to traditional English literature. You don't need to know Shakespeare. And in a sense, you should not know too much about Shakespeare. Because if you start to quote Shakespeare, except to be or not to be, but if you start to quote Shakespeare when speaking, with a Japanese or an American, sorry for that, you look weird. Weird. People say, what it means, this kind of... it's very interesting to see that English is the official, not the official, it's the language of the European Union, but there is almost no more English native speaker. So the language is now working independently of real culture, real territory, real people, etc., etc. And in my book, I mention a directive of Brussels, of the European Commission, about the use of language in Brussels, because it's a mess. There are some 27 languages which are officially recognized. Any member of the European Union is supposed to be free to use his or her language when speaking in Brussels, in the institutions. You have a huge bureaucracy of translators and interpreters. It's a huge business. And for the reasons of democracy, you cannot, say, no, it's finished, you have no right to speak Italian, you should speak only English. So there is a very interesting directive of the European Union, of the Commission, is, okay, you can speak your language. But when you speak your language, please don't make any cultural allusion to your native language. Speak your language without by deculturating your own language. If you start to make jokes, for instance, or to quote some novelists or poets in your own language, it's a problem. It's a problem. So you are encouraged not to make any reference to a culture. And it's exactly the role of Globish. It's an English which is totally disconnected from English literature. It's a pure system of communication. And as you know, we are not encouraged in the academy, but to make jokes. Because jokes, you can be misunderstood. You are always misunderstood, by the way, but some people might not like what you say, or might think that you are hinting at something that you didn't say explicitly, and so on and so on. So the rule is not joke. Or if you make a joke, you have to say, this is a joke, and you put an emoji. So start of the joke, end of the joke. That's all. So you're allowed. So what I'm saying is that the crisis of culture is precisely, this transition to a system of codification. We are not using a cultural system which is based on the implicit, and we have to speak in a way of codification. A green light is a green light. A red light is a red light. Yes is yes. No is no, etc., etc. You cannot, explain yourself. Oh, you cannot make jokes. You cannot make allusions. You have to be systematically explicit. That's what I call deculturation. So my opinion, my view, it can be debated, is that the crisis now is not just a crisis of deculturation, acculturation. It always existed, that culture is in crisis and that you have to change to another culture. Colonization is a typical example of deculturation of the colonized people and acculturation, the imposition of a new dominant culture. That's a very classical in history. But what I think we have now is not a new kind of acculturation, which is adopting a new culture, but precisely a profound crisis of culture. And because we have this crisis of what is implicit, our way to communicate and to interact is based on two things, explicitation and normativity. And what did happen in religion during the 90s, to simplify, is happening now everywhere. It explains the violence of politics. Politics have always been violent, for sure. But what we have now is a language of violence, which is not necessarily related to a given ideology. If you ask me what is the ideology of Trump, well, he has no ideology. He has no coherent vision of the world. He is his ideology. Narcissism is replacing, if I can say that, political ideologies. We don't care about what he really... it's a performative kind of politics, and not the consequence of the application of a program. The proof is that, in fact, we don't know what he will do. We say he is crazy. It's easy to say that. What we are confronted with is something more. We have more and more unpredictable and narcissistic political leaders. More and more. There's always been crazy people among the Roman emperors, for instance. But you had institutions. The empire was still working even when the emperor was crazy. Caligula was crazy, but okay, no problem. The system was going on. And now, if we have a more and more crisis of the political systems, for me, it's precisely a consequence of the deculturation, that we are no more sharing a common sense. In the, I would say, the literally sense of common sense, a sense which is shared, that we consider as obvious. Nothing is obvious now. Hence, the violence of the political scene. It's not a matter of wars. Always been wars, civil wars. It's not the extension of violence is not about strategy, politics. It's precisely a consequence of what I call the deculturation. And how do we try to solve that? By extending more and more the normativity system, by making more and more laws, regulations, etc., etc. And it doesn't work, of course, because if you make regulations without having some sort of a consensus, at least in a part of the population, it simply doesn't work. The extension of normativity is absolutely obvious. I mean, at least for the people above 40 years. If you look at, take, 20, 30 years ago, in your institution, the university, in your habitation, your building where you have an apartment, in your working place, in the streets, or very simple thing, like you take drugs that you buy, medicines that you buy at the pharmacy, and look at the number of regulations. If you took just some aspirins, 20 years ago you had a small sheet of paper. Now you have 5 pages inside the box, the medicine box, telling you anything not you should know, but you have to know, or you are supposed to know. When you click on the internet, you are supposed to have signed 70 pages of agreements, understanding, and so and so. The regulations in any kind of institutions, working place, building, has tremendously extended. And it's not manageable. So the issue is not that we have a more effective system by extending regulation. The issue is that we need to extend, that the extension of normativity is a consequence of deculturation, of the fact that we do not share anything, something in common. Everything has to be explicit and also in terms of norms. I will not speak about internet. It's so obvious, that in internet you share, you discuss with people that you don't know. You don't share anything except that what you say of you and of the other people. Now, it's why identity now is a big word in politics, in sociology, etc. Identity is just a set of markers that are supposed to define what you are, what your nation is supposed to be, what your country is, etc. Identity has replaced culture. We don't speak about defending our own culture. We are defending our own identity. And what is identity? Just a set of markers. What is interesting is that when we speak, for example, of the Christian identity of Europe, against Muslims, of course, there is nothing Christian in it. Because the level of de-Christianization in Europe is extraordinary. The popes are the first to say Europe is no more Christian. Europe is a pagan culture. The first to say that was Paul VI. Benedict said it very explicitly. The dominant culture in Europe is pagan. It's not Christian. And Benedict said we have now to return. Yeah, it's a bit more complex. Jean Paul II thought that we could return to a Christian culture. Of course, it didn't work. Benedict knew that it was impossible to return to a Christian culture, so he said we have to respect, the non-negotiable principles. Abortion, same-sex marriage, etc. And he was fighting only on this agenda of normative agenda. And Francesco used to say, well, Europe is no more Christian. But I don't care, you know. I go where the Christians are. I go to Indonesia. I go to South America. I go to Africa. Here are the Christians. Here are the Catholics. You know? So you Europeans, you are the lost tribe of Catholicism. And we don't care about you. He will not come to inaugurate Notre Dame in 2 weeks in Paris. You know, we will have only our president. Which, from a religious point of view, is interesting, you know. So I will stop here because I will let the floor to my colleague. There is no conclusion. I'm cautious.
So good evening. Good to see you all here tonight. I was supposed to return this afternoon from the city of Utrecht, where massive protests were planned in our by our universities against the imminent cuts by the government. But as it happened, we did not go there. We didn't protest in Utrecht because of security concerns. But having that in mind and having read your wonderful book, I was, of course, reminded of what you wrote on the state of the universities, the cuts we are facing now, the crisis of culture, the way you discuss universities as sites of canonization, but also as sites where neoliberalism has really struck. I think this is an example you mentioned of the cultures of excellence that are so dominant in our universities. So your book gave a lot of food for reflection, and some of my thoughts about the book I will bring now to the floor to discuss it this evening. I will start with a few remarks on the general gist of the book. The main title, its main title is Crisis of Culture, which is a slight change with regard to the book as it was published in French in 2022, which had in the main title the Aplatissement du Monde, which I liked very much. I think it's translated in the English version as the flattening of the world. And as you have gathered from what Professor Olivier Roy has just said, this is part of this phenomenon of deculturation that he analyzes in this book as almost an end stage in the cultural evolution, cultural changes that our world has gone through. Flattening, aplatissement, it has a connotation in secularization, of course. The world flattens. You have also been discussing deterriorization, so the loss of territory, globalization, secularization. All this is apparent in religion, but I think what you are saying in the book is, in fact, that this is going on in many aspects of our societies. I mentioned the example of the universities, but you have discussed abortion. We also encounter discussions on autism, for example. So there are many aspects that you bring together to discuss this aplatissement, this flattening of the world and the crisis of culture that is another symptom of that. And I think you go even further in this book. It is not just a crisis of culture, it becomes at the end a crisis of humanity. And the gist of the book is in a sense very pessimistic. There is no solution to this crisis of humanity. Perhaps at the end, a small glimmer of hope, and I will discuss that because I want to discuss perhaps also with you, if you're willing to, whether there are any solutions to this. Are we facing the end of humanity, the end of the world, or are there still things we can do? Reading your book, I was also reminded of a book that I read earlier, and to me was a wonderful analysis of neoliberalism. I don't know whether you know this book by David Corrett and Richard King. It is called Selling Spirituality. And in this book, the authors explain or argue how religion makes place for spirituality. Religion seen as something collective that has also possibilities of protest, of resilience, whereas spirituality is in fact the adaptation of religion to the needs of an individualized society that is ruled by neoliberalism. So we're becoming spiritual not because we want to, but because the economic and ideological needs force us to go into that direction. I was reminded of your book, or of their book, when I read yours. Now, a few things that you already have been saying, but for you, deculturation is very important, crucial even if you want to analyze the present state of humanity. Deculturation is a concept that appeared in sociology in the context of decolonization and the effects of colonization, as has been argued. It denotes the loss of culture when a particular group becomes devoid of one or more aspects of its culture. In other words, in a context of intense cultural contact, such as migration and political domination, we are dealing with deculturation. Deculturation is accelerated by globalization. You have already spoken about it. But according to most theories of culture, deculturalization is usually followed by acculturation, which means the inclusion of elements of the dominant culture. Now, Olivier Roy now posits that unlike in any earlier cultural history where deculturalization occurred, there is no turn at this moment to another culture. There is no acculturation anymore. So what does this mean? It means, I think in the final analysis, that we are facing with a global culture, and until the moment that this global culture may be replaced by something that is really embedded, because nowadays, according to Roy, this global culture is not really in existence. I remind you of what he said about the European Union and its language. There is no such culture beyond these cultures, and we are in limbo. We are betwixt and between, to put it in the terms of anthropologist Victor Turner. So we are no longer embedded. We are in a cultural void. The argument that cultures are in crisis is illustrated in many ways by sometimes extensive discussions and at other times almost casual case study manners. Things are addressed in a thought-provoking and sometimes a little bit polemical way. These cases are all discussed as symptoms of what should be criticized. And as I said at the start, at the beginning, the picture that arises is pessimistic until the very conclusions where we detect a glimmer of hope, to which I will return. Compared to his earlier books, such as Is Europe Christian and Holy Ignorance, the tone of Olivier Roy in this book is far more urgent. The flattening is now all around in all sorts of aspects of modern life. The example of columnist George Maynard is mentioned, who on two instances in 1988 and 2018 shows a complete turnaround on issues of what I briefly would call Me Too. Is this expansion of normativity a sign of crisis, according to Roy? I think it is. And not only, as I explained, but we may hear him later on, not a crisis of culture, but even of humanity. I will formulate now two questions that we might discuss further on. Needless to say, there are many more in this very rich and learned book. The first is about religion, a theme that has also been addressed just now. And one of the symptoms of the crisis is that cultures, including religions, are reduced to norms and codes in the form of very simple rules. Deculturalized religions tend to radicalize, essentialize. But is this picture not too pessimistic? Is there not also acculturation going on instead of deculturation only? Let me take as an example the veil, also mentioned by Olivier Roy just now. a practice that can indeed be called an identity marker and a contested one in many European countries. The wearer of the veil, Roy tells us, does not say, I wear it because it is a cultural tradition of my ancestors, but it is to avoid the alienation of men, to assert my identity. From fieldwork research done by a researcher whose name is Sahar Noor among Muslim women in the Netherlands, we may see a different route. In women reading groups that she studied, and she did empirical research, observations among them, we see how these women in these small reading groups, where they read texts with one another, they are looking, they are searching for something that, interesting enough, they call a culture-free Islam. Why do they do it? What is that they are seeking here? Because, of course, the concept is a very weird one on the first sight. What is culture-free? Well, what they are looking for, according to Sahar Noor, is to find an Islam that is no longer the Islam of tradition, of where they come from. And why is that? Because they feel that in their new environment, they don't want to follow the practices, the cultural practices of their countries of origin. They want to, isolate the norms that they may apply in their new environment. So, and that is why they turn, and this is of course something that you address in your book as well, they turn to texts, because that is that is in their consciousness the basis of that they can use to apply to their new environment. And so that is what's happening. That is why they, in discussing the veil, won't say, well, we are following a tradition, we are following the culture, because they want to get rid of that culture, because in many ways it is seen as not something they want to transmit to their children, to a next generation. So what we are seeing here perhaps is an acculturation. It is a search for new norms. But I was struck by the fact that you, and I think you're quite right there, this process of cultural transmission to a new environment may be difficult when that new environment is not hospitable to these groups. And so what in practice, of course, happens is that this transmission to what may be called a Dutch or European Islam may be hindered by obstacles. But nevertheless, I think this is happening. It is something that is going on grassroots levels. You don't perhaps see it, but it's there. Another example that I would like to mention is what is going on in the Moroccan communities. We see here a sort of revocation of the traditional school that is in Morocco, the Maliki law school. And you see that Moroccan communities around mosques in the Netherlands now again start turning to that tradition, giving it new ideas, and also trying to translate their books into Dutch. So I met a colleague at the Islamic University in Rotterdam the other day who said, it is now possible, I don't know whether it's true, but he said, it is now possible for a young Moroccan to learn about Moroccan Islam solely by using translated books into Dutch. So this is, again, something that points to a transmission. So I wonder, what does that mean? Is there not more acculturation than maybe appears from your book? It might be a hopeful sign. So let's discuss that. The other thing is, what can we do? And you did say something about that in your conclusions when you, I think, turn to the possibilities of a bottom-up movement aiming at a cultural restoration to restore a sort of social imaginary on a grassroots level. And this seems to me, well, an interesting thought, but how do you think it can be realized in practice? Is there something that you expect to be spontaneous or an effort? I guess the latest, the last one, the last possibility. But there may be another thing that might be interesting to consider as well. Is a little bit absent from your book, and that is the whole notion of politics. Where could politics help us? Where could politics, you rightly observe the nation state has been weakened, plays not a large role anymore, but are there possibilities of still using the nation state, still using state formations and political power to address the problems you observe? So thank you very much, and well, look forward to the discussion.
Dear audience, please do keep your questions after the feedback or the response that Olivier will give to Gerard Wever's questions, and then we'll turn to the audience. So do prepare your questions.
Thank you very much. You really grasp what I wanted to say. You know, in all these different books. So I will go directly to the conclusions. I fully agree with you about the veil, but my conclusion is different. They are really looking for a culture-free Islam, which does not necessarily mean an accommodation to an other culture. It means, on the contrary, that, you know, both cultures are deculturated. So what they are adapting to is in a society where the issue is about norms and values. And the veil is perfectly compatible, you know, in this case, you know, when we ask about norms and values. But there is no... they discard the concept of tradition, either a Dutch tradition or a Muslim tradition or Moroccan tradition. The issue is my identity in this case. So it's an adaptation to an individualistic society, and not the endeavor to recreate a new community and a new culture for my point of view. It goes along, you know, with the shift from religion to spirituality. Spirituality is individualism, and everybody has his or her own spirituality. You don't create a collective with a spirituality. It explains why you have so many cults, you know, so the crisis of the very concept of religion is connected to the crisis of the very concept of culture. Now, the issue is, okay, we are in a state of deculturation. So we replace traditions, implicit and so, with explicit norms and markers of identity. Will this go towards a new culture? Because I think that human beings are cultural animals, that we cannot get rid of the concept of culture like that. But the crisis of culture is a crisis of humanity in the deep sense of the term, of the human species. Another possibility, another perspective, would be the perspective of Norbert Elias. You know, the how to civilize. You know, you start from some sort of state of nature, and you go to a new civilization through a process of normativity. For instance, the debate on masculinity is exactly that. What is the problem with masculinity? Is it, you know, an issue of biology, hormones, DNA, etc.? Is it an issue of culture, patriarchal culture? In both cases, it has to be put under a system of norms. But if we extend this kind of education, maybe we will produce, in 1 or 2 generations, a new kind of males. Which is exactly the way of Norbert Elias show how the aristocracy at that time had been able to create a state, a society of politeness, instead of what you would call nature. So that's a big question. You know. So what I see as the process of a crisis of culture maybe is just a transition towards a new culture. I don't know. I don't know. So I stick with my point of view, but I don't exclude the other point of view, which is that we are going towards a new culture. And of course, when any process of deculturation is anxiogen. When people are losing their culture, they have an apocalyptical view of the future. The idea is that it's the end of history. We are lost, and so. This has been well studied by the anthropologists, especially about the Native Americans, who suddenly saw the very basis of their culture to be destroyed. And so, alcohol, drugs, suicide, etc. And it has been studied in different contexts. Yeah, I think that the only concrete things that we can do in the present circumstances is to try to recreate social binds, social ties from the bottom of the society. I think that there is a big crisis of politics. It's not just, an issue of finding a good new party with a good agenda that will win the elections and then recreate something. So we have a profound corruption of the political world. Not corruption of politicians, but of the very concept of politics. It doesn't work. And populism is just populism is not fascism. People are not fighting for a new kind of superhero, human being, etc. They are fighting to preserve their way of life. In our society, nobody is dreaming. Maybe for good reasons, but that's another story. You have a crisis of utopia. You have no more. The youth are not utopians because they fear the future. Climate, the global warming is something we want to prevent, which means that we want to prevent the future to come and stay as we are or come back to the past. The same with the populists, to preserve my way of life. And what is your way of life? It was the way of life of your grandfather or when you were young. It was 50 years ago. The 50s now, in France particularly, it's seen as the perfect time of culture, French identity. And it was a terrible time. You had the war in Algeria, you had but no, now, Alain Delon, Jean Gabin, that's a good old time. Yeah, okay. So, I don't expect anything of politics now. And through this construction of grassroots ties, I think that's the thing we can do. And there are many people who are trying to do that. In France, for example, the movement Les Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest, it was exactly the problem. In urbanization, where now the low middle classes are far from the centers of towns. You are in a nice teeny house with a teeny garden, but you have to wake up at 5 in the morning to bring the kids to school, to go to work, and so on. So, and the movement was it was not a political movement. It was not an ideological movement. They were not racist, They just wanted to recreate some kind of social ties. And the government sent the police. And the intelligentsia was, all these guys are populists. They are... So they had no or very little support from the intelligentsia, including the progressive intelligentsia. So the progressive intelligentsia used to support, the working class 50 years ago, but now they don't see anybody in the population. That's the reasons of the failure of Harris in the USA. Which is your constituency? You are fighting for ideas, but real people, how to connect with real people? No. And the only guys who connected with real people was Trump. So it's so we have actors. In Italy, for instance, we have the Catholic social movements, Comunione Liberazione, Sant'Egidio, and so. They are effectively efficient, not in building sects, because it's cults. It's always the danger, you know, in this kind of thing. But in trying to connect, to recreate a shared space of socialization. It works or not, that's another story. But there is a real demand for that. So that's. But I see not just a will, but under, you know, behind the nostalgia of the people for the past, and so I see a demand for a new kind of sociability.
No, I think that we could. Let's.
And now we'll just open up the floor to the questions from the audience. Let's start this here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the book, and years long I'm learning and following your work. And thank you so much for many ideas which have often deceptive simplicity. And actually are very, very profound. I want to ask you two questions. First of all, it seems that you have decided to give up almost explicitly on the idea of counterculture, which has for many years served to capture phenomena that express complete discontent with the surrounding culture. And I wonder, indeed, if you prefer deculturation to counterculture, and would you say that indeed counterculture fails to account for the changes you try to capture? The second is, first, you know, I read Holy Ignorance a couple of years ago, and I had the impression that what you offer there is a sort of a theory of modernity. Modernity has not been the time of disenchantment. Modernity has not been the time of secularization. Modernity has been the time in which religion and culture have managed to part ways. And therefore religion persists, yet in different forms, not in relation to culture, but independently to culture. However, when I heard you today and when I read the last book, I ask, is it just a theory of modernity? Isn't it something bigger? Because some of the developments you describe, we could well see well in the past. I mean, Salafism may be a modern phenomenon, indeed, but Protestantism, not necessarily so. Early Christianity with regard to paganism, not necessarily so. And in all of those moments, you see the same pattern. Suddenly there is a group that express complete disregard to the surrounding culture, declare everything that is going on, including clothing, as completely wrong, and aspires, and here perhaps you may argue they aspire for acculturation. However, you see that some of those groups remain cults, remain on the margins, and therefore I wonder, is it a theory of religious power and how religion and culture indeed interact throughout generations in cycles of engagement and disengagement, or is it indeed a theory of modernity or perhaps even high modernity in which only recently we could imagine a society without culture, as Herod said, the end of humanity? Thank you very much.
Yeah, counterculture. I am the generation of counterculture, and I'm getting very old. And culture didn't survive. I'm surviving. This. Why it didn't work? For instance, the idea of the 60s was that so it was quite individualistic. It was on the same line that the individualism of the Enlightenment. But instead of being built on the rational individual, it was built on the desiring individual. The idea was that culture is alienating desire. And so we have to get rid of culture in order to let the desire to be free. And that if everybody is able to do that, there would be an harmony of desires, that the desire will be the vector of harmony, social harmony. And of course, it didn't work at all. We realized after a long, more or less time, that this culture of freedom was in fact a new form of domination. Clearly, that sexual freedom was also not necessarily in itself, but led to new forms of domination, especially male domination. And it's true. All this crisis, it's very interesting. In France, the movement among movie actresses. The movies of the 90s were precisely based on this idea of freedom, sexual freedom. And now they say how it was for them an oppression. The way of rethinking about the change of how to say, of evaluating beauty, arts, etc. Some movies which I loved when I was younger, Blew Up, for instance, Les Valseuses in France, now are seen, even Rabbi Jacob, are seen now as inconceivable, racist, machist, etc., etc. And it's true that when looking at Les Valseuses, for instance, with Depardieu, how can I have been able to appreciate not to love, no, to like, this movie? It's totally impossible now, and not just because we have a new censorship and so. No, myself, it's impossible, So the conclusion is that we have been totally unable to transform the counterculture into a new culture. The counterculture had exactly the same problem that the cultures in itself, exactly the same problem. These communities, I live for little time in such a communities, but when you live in a community, you had an increase of normativity, of course, because everything had to be defined, who is supposed to do what is the workload of everybody, etc. You cannot, there is you can, like in anarchy. So when you decide to get rid of the dominant culture and to create, an utopian community, then what you have at the end, it's a normativity and domination, clearly. So there is no such a thing as a counterculture. A counterculture is always the premise of something that will come. It's a symptom, it's what you want, but never a new culture. And the modernity, I see what you mean, and I don't know. In some sort, as I said, Protestantism at the time of Luther was an extraordinary phenomenon of deculturation. Suddenly you got rid of institutions, of a lot of things, including Latin and so on and so on and so on. But the extraordinary thing with the Protestantism, it has been able to create a new culture in one generation. For me, I am not an historian, but it's something absolutely fantastic. I'm looking for researchers, historians, about this, to explain that. How now we can say we are at the same moment, same kind of turning point. We have a break with the existing culture, with the tradition. Of course, the new system is based on normativity because you have no choice, but it will lead to something else. Maybe. I'm very pessimistic because it's the best way to deal when you write a book. Either you are right, no? And 20 years ago people will say, oh, you was right, or you are wrong, and people will be more happy. So it's a win-win situation for an author.
Thank you. Are there more questions from the audience? Maybe I could ask one. Thank you. Maybe a little bit about the identity. I mean, on the one hand, I totally agree with you that, identity is about certain markers, about certain, elements that are recognizable. But at the same time, I don't know, I'm hopeful, probably a little bit as Gerard, about the younger generation, that although was TikTok, it may be all indeed about channeling certain identity, but at the same time, it feels like it may be a belonging as well. That sort of new understanding of community, not so much the one we get used to, where indeed you go together, march on the streets, you politically engage for a cause, but maybe exactly through, I don't know, new forms of certain identity. There's also idea of belonging and desire to belong, and the recognition that you belong, because indeed in these online communities there is maybe something that we are just not seeing. What is your perspective on that?
The problem is that these kind of communities are virtual communities. And you put in this community what you want to put, or more exactly what the other want you to put. So you can join a community of manga, people who love manga, and of course you will have people who are like you. It's a community of the self, of this identical. So identity is to be identical in this kind of virtual community. So the problem is what you do when you shut up your computer. Somebody never shut up your computer. We have this kind of Japanese youth who spend all their life in their bedroom because they never shut up. But fortunately enough, most people do shut their computer, turn their computer off. They go to buy food, the children go to school, etc. So the problem is the discrepancy between the virtual community where you have you enjoy, but it's very narcissistic, and the rest of the world, which is of no interest. And the problem is that because your community is based on being the same, being the self, then you cannot understand the people who are not a part of your community. Hence, this inability to negotiate relations with the other people. You are in or you are out. You are a friend or you are an enemy. You like or you don't like. It's a binary system of relations. And it's now going to politics. The problem is not the program. The problem is me and the others are enemies. So I don't see this kind of community as the basis for a new culture, because it's not based on any kind of implicit. On the contrary, it's just a set of explicit markers that distinguish you from the other communities, and you don't share. You don't share.
Please, there is lady.
Yes. Do you maybe think it's possible that there could be like sort of a new religion, because all these people have access to the internet and they read a lot about researches, and that's why they become non-believers, and so there is a crisis of religions because people become too smart because they read everything and they listen to podcasts by academics. And of course, religions also create a lot of division between groups in the world. And couldn't we go back to sort of a religion of nature? Because, those are facts. We have the seasons, we have, nature. It's very important in this time to worship nature in a way because of global warming. And that would be something for everybody. So that we sort of go back to, harvest time, the longest day in the summer. Well, some groups already do that, like midsummer, but it has to be organized, of course. But do you think there's a chance that that could come back, sort of?
These are what we call spiritualism. It's not religion. It's not based on a dogma. You have no institutions, no theology. So it's largely some sort of a feeling. And this, I don't see how it can become a new religion in the sense that it can replace Islam or Christianity or Buddhism, etc. So it's still disembedded from a social life. It's a way to escape social life. It's not a way to change social life. Now, will these movements be able, to achieve the critical mass in terms of belongings and so on, to be real actors, social and political actors? Maybe, but I think at this time, at this moment, they will lose precisely what is the originality of the movement. And it's interesting to see that even this kind of mystical approach to nature, is turning also into a normative system. The idea, for instance, to give veganism, to consider that in fact there is no two species, the animals and the human beings, that we have all sentient. It's also totally transforming the concept of culture, because until now the idea was culture was opposed to nature. By definition, whatever the kind of break, rupture, on contrary, domestication, but always this binary approach. Now these new trends, mystical trends, are based on the idea that there is no separation, that we should blur the lines between culture and nature, which means blurring the lines between human beings and animals. And it's the only way to be to have this kind of new spirituality to be recognized is to go to the courts and to ask the parliaments to make law on giving, for example, rights to animals, or giving rights to a river or to a tree, etc. So here is the trap, because starting this feeling of communion with nature, we tend to turn also to a new system of normativity. So it's cycling around. And if it turns into a religion, then you will have religious leaders, spiritual leaders, and you will have politics, and exclusions, scissions, heretics. Any religion creates heretics by definition.
Thank you for a very interesting event. I have a lot of questions. I'll see if I can formulate one that hasn't been approached yet. You kind of touch upon loneliness, and I'm just going to give anecdote, at least examples. My upstairs neighbor, former upstairs neighbor, would order literally food from around the corner. He never would go out. He had a very good paying job, and he would go out maybe at night to disco. Well, that shows my age, to a nightclub or something like that. Is that what's now being called the epidemic of loneliness, and not only involving younger people but also older people? That part of this process of deculturalization, because you need to have people meeting face to face, and one way of countering that have more and more in-person meetings. You also, if you see it, there are more. Where I live in Amsterdam, there are more and more coffee shops opening up with people with laptops. So there's this. How do you? Where's your view of that?
I never saw in other town so many people speaking alone in the streets. And in fact, they don't speak alone; they speak to somebody. But and going in the street and outside, they just go through. And the food is the issue of food is very also interesting. This. Food now, it's a collection of cultural markers. You take something from Chinese food, something from Indonesian food, something from American food, and you put that, I saw, what did I say today, Chinese tapas, for instance, Chinese tapas. It's typical, what I call deculturation, which goes along with globalization. Effectively, if you have Chinese tapas, it's global, no problem. You can have Chinese tapas everywhere in the world. I didn't try.
There's one more question.
Hello, thank you. Just to try. What would you say that decolonialism or decolonization is? That a form of meta-religion or the deculturalization globally, the decolonial movement global?
That's very interesting because colonialization did happen. Okay, it's a typical case of deculturation, domination, but acculturation. They are imposing a new kind of culture. Now, the decolonialist movement is it's just about culture. It's not about real people. It's the debate on cultural appropriation, for instance, is very, very interesting. The idea that, in fact, it's a culturalist movement. The idea that you have cultures now, and you have dominated cultures and dominant cultures. So the decolonialist movement doesn't take into account what I am saying. They are not obliged, I am saying that, but they do not take into account the deculturation. So they are in a perspective which is old-fashioned, that we have cultures, but what if, no, there is no more culture? What do we do? And that's very interesting because the decolonializing movement has no political perspective. What they want is not to have a new state, a new regime. Are not Marxist or any kind of thing like that. They want the government to apologize. So they are on a normative perspective, but they are not revolutionary at all. When you ask the dominant to apologize and to say, I'm sorry, I'm the dominant, I am ashamed to be a white man, a white old male, etc., you just forget one thing. The white old man is still in charge. So he apologized, but he is still in charge. For me, the problem of the woke movement is that it's absolutely not a revolutionary movement. The proof is America. It's not connected with real movement. Well, what I'm saying is, I would say, personal. I'm not making great theories about the world. My generation was revolutionary, for good or bad reasons. We made a lot of stupid things. And the Cultural Revolution in China was an absolutely catastrophe. Okay. But we went outside the campuses. We wanted to connect with the revolutionary working class, so we went to the plants, the fabrics, and so on. So we wanted to connect with the liberation movement. We went. I went in a nowhere place. I tried to went to Dhofar at that time. A very nice place, by the way. So some of my friends went to Bolivia, many of us did stupid things. A part became terrorist, which is always interesting. How do you become terrorist when a political mass movement is failing, and you are still pursuing your own personal trajectory, which is in fact a suicidal trajectory. You could speak a lot about jihadi. I always compare the jihadi with the revolutionaries of the 60s. But at least the idea was you have a collective. You have classes, you have people, and so. Now, in one of the institutions, academic institutions I'm working of course, Gaza had a lot of impact among students. So the students decided to occupy the campus. Occupy the campus. So they did occupy the campus. And the administration brought to them sandwiches, okay, and the administration set up a psychological team to deal with the suffering of the students. Because the students are suffering because of the situation in Gaza. So the administration said, okay, we'll send you a team of psychologists. I found that extraordinary. And at my time, we would have kicked the psychologist outside of the campus, But no. It's, yes, I'm suffering. When I look at what is going on in the world, I am suffering. Okay, maybe you could do something real. So I am not suggesting anything. I am not. I'm just saying that still, this decolonialism movement is in a movie. Is not in real life. So it's a typical example of what I call deculturation and deterritorialization. But I am not saying you should take a gun and go somewhere. We did it didn't result was catastrophic. So.
I think on this note, to do something, but ideally without much violence. Thank you so much, Olivier, for your talk, Gerard, for your comments, and for your audience for coming here and for your questions. There are drinks after the talk, so please do stay for a glass of cola or wine, and there will be opportunity to talk to Olivier also afterwards. Thank you.